Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to start this event this afternoon. Thank you for coming. You know we have some esteemed guests, so the panel will be under additional scrutiny. We have the Minister of Environment from the Commonwealth of Dominica, Minister Cozier Frederick, here with us. I know Minister Saboto Caesar is hanging around somewhere nearby, so we have some very high regional guests looking down at you, panel, so no pressure. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, the panel discussion we have this afternoon, we will be looking at implementing the agricultural elements of the nationally determined contributions in enhancing ambition for greater adaptation and mitigation action in the Caribbean agricultural sector. Before I introduce the panel, I just want to say that, and I think we had a session hosted by the World Farmers Organization, and Mr. Steve Maxime there gave a little brief historical account of how agriculture came to be as one of the central issues now. For a long time it was not. And in the whole thrust of climate change, there has been a struggle so that agriculture, which is constantly blamed for a lot of the emissions, that it has to be included part and parcel. And of course, the strategies and most importantly, the finance for the mitigation and adaptation has to be part of the dialogue, part of the discourse, and part of the planning and design. So we have here with us today Mr. Calvin James, the extreme right. Mr. James is the Executive Director of the Partnership Initiative for Sustainable Land Management, PISLM. We have also Mr. Iwan Samunda. Mr. Samunda is the manager of the Climate Change Unit in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries in Suriname. We have with us also Mr. Kelvin Ali, Senior Vice President, Strategy, Delivery and Field Partnerships, Conservation International, based in the US. And of course, we have Ms. Shana Emanuel, Program Officer, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean State Secretariat, which is based in St. Lucia. So very esteemed panel that we have here today. The forum here was conceptualized by a program that we have under ICA's internal climate change program, which is called the Caribbean Climate Responsive Agriculture Forum, CRAF. Also, we have this project CACHI, which is also collaborating, and of course, USAID and IFPRI. I think we have some technical difficulties there. Just a minute, colleagues, yes? Go ahead. Yeah. Okay, so we will begin. Mr. Manuel, I think I will begin with you. The first question I ask you in the framework of what we are here to discuss. The OECS has started a Caribbean NDC Finance Initiative.
Correct.
Could you tell us more about that and why attracting finance for the implementation of the agricultural component of the NDC is important?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So the OECS started the Caribbean NDCFI initiative, NDC Finance Initiative, which we call NDCFI, in 2018. It was a direct answer to the NDCs that had first, for most countries, been submitted in 2016, 15, 16. And at the time, the thought was, let's bring all the ideas, let's bring all the possible partners together. We actually started with a forum in 2018 that brought both development partners, but also the countries together to kind of start thinking about how are we going to implement these NDCs, because we submitted them and now we needed to move into an implementation phase. So it started off actually with three working groups. That's kind of how we work. And those three were energy, water, and critical infrastructure. One of the reasons for those three was because those were the ones at the time that were reflected in most NDCs in the region. Of course, we know that most of our countries between 2020 and 2021 submitted either updated or second NDCs, and that's when we saw agriculture kind of start to play its role. Several of the member states of the OECS came and had agriculture actually as a sector that they wanted to tackle in their NDC. From that, we started thinking about our second forum, even though we were in the midst of COVID. And in the second forum, agriculture was actually very much, it was one of the big sectors that was featured, and lots of discussion around how were we going to build into the NDCFI and build into NDC implementation, the agriculture sector, because it's both mitigation and adaptation. Of course, it has co-benefits on both sides. So some countries put it under adaptation and then others actually put it under mitigation. So the NDCFI, since then, we've been working on how best to show and demonstrate to the region and the world on a whole what the Caribbean is doing to deal with its agriculture problems, and looking for the specific Caribbean solutions to some of those challenges. So we're hoping to have another forum next year. We know for a fact that agriculture will be part of that. Um, but it really is about looking at the various solutions. And when you read the NDCs of our member states, you will see that some were very specific in trying to include renewable energy, for example, in the agriculture sector. Others were looking at livestock and how to reduce emissions from those. Others were looking at how to better use waste in order to fuel other industries. So for us, I think in the region overall, when we look at agriculture, we're really looking at both sides of the coin. It's not just a mitigation measure, it is definitely an adaptation measure. It's also a food security issue, which is a developmental issue. So that's, in a nutshell, what the NDCFI does and how we hope to include agriculture in it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Emmanuel. So you would note that I started on the issue of finance, because many times we have all these beautiful plans, and it's what models of finance, where do we source the finance to implement them? And that's why I started of a model that is being looked at in the region that, you know, that could potentially be replicated for the countries. Mr. James, I will attend to you and your area. Typically, when we talk about agriculture, we speak of land simply as a factor of production. But within the framework of adaptation and mitigation, the whole idea of land management is a whole lot more.
Yeah.
The question I have for you, why is sustainable land management key to achieving adaptation and mitigation goals in the Caribbean?
All right, thank you for that question, and good afternoon, one and all. Land by itself means nothing. But I often say, I'm here for the first time at a climate change conference, and I have come to the conclusion that without land, we cannot solve climate change. Trees don't grow in space, it grows on the land. Therefore, I think the most important thing, therefore, we need is healthy lands. A healthy land means healthy soils. And therefore, the reason we exist, PISLM, is to enable or facilitate countries in meeting those core objectives of developing healthy lands. I work under the UNCCD system. And one of the synergies that I took note of is a methodology called land degradation neutrality. And what land degradation neutrality does, it says, and I'll just read the definition, but in the main, what it says is if I'm going to develop a sector, let's say mining, I have to do it in such a way that I compensate by regenerating or developing other areas so that there's a net neutral development impact. And the definition simply says it's a state whereby the amount and quality of land resources necessary to support ecosystem function and the services and enhance food security remains stable or increase within specified temporal or and spatial scales and ecosystems. So it doesn't say stop development. It says if you're going to develop within that space of development, we have to, let's say you're going to put up a hotel plant. Within that space, we need to increase probably our tree stock or help our agriculture sector become stronger so that it participates in the climate change agenda. And therefore, with that said, and I'll probably speak to this later on, we are the executing agency for all 14 Caribbean countries in reporting to the UNCCD. And I have some very interesting statistics to show that if we do not take stock of our land, which by the way doesn't grow, it's the one commodity that actually is decreasing, we can find ourselves talking about agriculture in a different mode, maybe on water. And so I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Mr. Jim. And the land grows about in Hawaii. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. James. And yeah, so just to inform the gathering, yesterday we had the presence of Minister who is the chair of the Ministerial Council for PISLM. Yesterday, PISLM and ECA, we signed an MOU to work together looking at issues related to soil health and other related matters, as Calvin expounded on the critical aspect. I see Shana is having a battle with a headphone. Suspect you just had to hold it in your hand.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So, Shana went to war with her headphone. Yeah, so let's continue. Colleagues, I want to get through the questions so that we have sufficient time for engagement with the audience. Mr. Samunda, quick question. You had the framework of a model for finance. You're hearing the importance, both conceptually, scientifically, practically, the whole idea of land and the importance within the broader framework of mitigation and adaptation. But everything really matters when the rubber hits the road in country. The question I'm posing to you as head of the climate change unit in Suriname, in the Ministry of Agriculture in Suriname, what measures has Suriname prioritized within the agricultural elements of the NDCs and why?
Thank you, Kurt, for introducing. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Kurt, if you allow me to highlight some of the aspects why it is important for not only Suriname, but also for the Caribbean to position the agriculture sector in our NDCs. One of the most important things is when you have included the agriculture sector in the NDC, we have to realize that it opens up opportunities for climate finance. That's one. The other thing is, you look at the vulnerability of the sector in the Caribbean, and I'm speaking in the case of Suriname, where all the economic activities, especially the agriculture sector, is concentrated along the coastal zone. That makes it very vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like sea level rise. We've recently experienced, I mean, you also live in Suriname, right? We've recently experienced the floodings that have shown an increasing trend over the years. We have problems with rising temperatures, and we also have salinization of the agricultural lands. Business as usual isn't possible anymore. We need to take actions, and therefore, well, agriculture is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. At the same time, it is also a contributor to the emissions. But we have to take in mind that agriculture also offers a lot of solutions to reduce emissions. So therefore, this duality is how we frame that to position the agriculture sector within the NDC of Suriname. The main elements that we included, the central elements that we included in the NDC of Suriname, in the recent NDC 2020, that is mainly focused on land use planning and on research and development. Land use planning, because as my other colleagues have mentioned, I heard them talking about land use planning. Land use planning is very important to ensure that the agriculture sector, the farms are building resilience, because our farms are concentrated in the low-lying coastal zone. Therefore, we intend to cluster the agriculture farms within a less climate-prone area, and ensuring that we don't clear other lands in a way to, in a sense, to avoid additional emissions, and in that sense, making the agriculture sector more resilient to the impacts of climate change. Another aspect is the research and development. Suriname has to put a lot of efforts in identifying, developing, and scaling up of climate-smart agriculture technologies that would help farmers to build resilience and at the same time reduce their vulnerabilities. Let me start mentioning that we have made some progress. There are a lot of options that are offered in international literature, but the thing is that we have to adopt, we can adopt those technologies, but we have to put them into the circumstances of our own country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samunda. And I would move to Mr. Ali now. Now, Mr. Ali, you work with Conservation International, and you would have a much broader outlook than the national perspective. You would say that we dealt with some of the elements within the traditional conceptualization of how we perceive agriculture.
Yes.
There's another important component, particularly for islands in the Caribbean, which the vast majority of the population live along the coast. But then you hardly hear us speaking of coastal implications within the context of agriculture. The question I have for you in that regard is, how do we see sustainable seascapes as an effective component for building the resilience of the agriculture sector as it relates to achieving NDC's mitigation and adaptation?
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm wearing two hats today. Obviously, I'm representing Conservation International, but first and foremost, I'm a Dominican, right? So I'm not being forced to choose because I'm wearing both hats. But one of the things I think it's very, very important. One of the things that we have seen, and I'm going to put it in a little bit of a context of the COP, the COPs, and there was this whole thing about COP26, I think, being the oceans COP. Because remember, a big focus of the Conference of the Parties, the climate change talks, has been around mitigation and forests and addressing deforestation and so on. COP26, the whole idea was we need to really emphasize the importance of oceans, not just for small island developing states, but globally, and the role of the oceans and seascapes in terms of food security, in terms of regulating climate, in terms of providing jobs. I think this is extremely critical and important, as you have said, especially for us in the Caribbean island states, and particularly in the context of climate adaptation, right? There's still a lot of conversations around mitigation and the role of the ocean in regulating climate, and we know that to be true, but I think for us in small island states, in terms of when we're looking at how we adapt to the onset of climate change, it's really, really important that we pay attention to our coastal ecosystems and our coastal environment. For me, I don't see the agricultural sector and oceans as a separate thing, because we are all connected. You know, I come from a farming and fishing community, so you had farmers and fishers in my own family, so there's a direct connection there. I see the direct connection. I think everything we do, we have been told when we were growing up, everything we do on land affects the ocean, right? And that's why there's a lot of conversations around reach to reef, you know, nature-based solutions in the agricultural sector, how we address pollutions coming from that perspective. For the audience, I wanted to give a little bit of a definition. I mean, seascape has a very specific definition, and for this group, I wanted to do that because the organization I represent, we do a lot of work on large ocean seascapes across the world. A lot of that work is happening in the Pacific, and there's the Eastern Tropical Pacific Seascape, which is Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia. There's 5 countries coming together to really look at how they protect their seascapes. But within that context, they're looking at land management and governance systems and enabling factors and so on. And in the context of a seascapes, the definition, I'm just following on Calvin's cue there, reading from definitions and stuff, that seascapes are large, multiple-use marine coastal areas, scientifically defined and identified in which a wide range of stakeholders, local communities, government, civil society partner to manage biodiversity and generate socioeconomic benefits for people. And I say that because in the context of us in the small islands, we are accustomed to marine protected areas. And in the Dominica context, we have the Soufriere Scott said Marine Reserve, that is obviously an integrated approach to seascape. So I think it's extremely important that within the context of the NDCs, as we think about climate adaptation and mitigation, that we connect the two. There is also the importance of seascapes when managed, being able to address that food security issue. I think we know that we're not only rely on food in terms of the agricultural sector, but the sector as well. So it addresses the issue of food security, I think in the context of resilience and our water security issues. Having a healthy ocean, it's really important. So from my perspective, I think when we talk about a holistic system, and I'm really appreciative of ICA, of you guys really stepping out and bringing in the ocean aspect to this, because sometimes we tend to see it separate. It's another agency to do this. I think making that link between the marine and the terrestrial is critical. We tend to make it in the context of a threatened space, you know, like we reach to reef. Okay, we say, okay, well, we want to focus on restoring our mangrove ecosystems and our coral reef ecosystems, and we look at it from agriculture as a threat, right? The pollution that's coming from the sector and sedimentation and those things. But I think it's important that we flip it a little bit, and rather than really focus on the threat base in terms of how can we connect it to, and sort of look at some of the innovation that's happening in the context of seascape. I would love to see a designated seascape in our small island space. I know that the OECS, and I see Crispin is there through the CROP project, they've started to look at more of a regional approach for the marine spatial planning work that's going on across the small islands. But I think it's really important to link the work, and more deliberately, to link the agricultural work with our ocean work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali. And I think the points you raised there are very important within the framework of how we view that dialogue and incorporation of agriculture within the climate change dialogue. It's that the three principal guidelines that ECO follows, that the farmer must be central to whatever is being designed within that framework, that the decisions and actions that are taken must be driven by science, and the final one, I think I forgot the final one now.
Integration, an integrated approach.
Yeah. 3 of them to slip me when it comes back to my mind. So, panelists, oh yes, the final one, agriculture is part of the solution and not the problem. And I think it takes to the point that seeing it as a threat rather than as part of the solution. So these were the 3. That's what the white hair means. You begin to lose cells up there. Yeah. So panelists, I'm going to have a general question for each of you, and I'm going to engage the audience here. to see if we could get a healthy discussion and dialogue between the panelists. We meet the deadlines, prepare some nice fancy documents, we submit our nationally determined, we do assessments, submit our nationally determined contributions and all that. But if we do not implement, what's the point? The question I will go from here all the way down. Name one priority measure you believe is needed to improve implementation of NDCs in the Caribbean agricultural sector. Mr. Samunda, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Kurt. I'll start with one word, action. Action. We make agreements, we need to translate that into actions. We make promises, we need to translate that into programs, projects. We've been coming to these COPs and to these negotiations and to these workshops. We go back home and then the farmer asks, what did you achieve? We need implementation. And I think that oftentimes when we develop the NDCs, then we have a period of that it gets stranded because it lacks the coordination and the adoption and the support from the implementing ministries, for instance. We need to build awareness. We need to get them on board. And I have some other points here. So we need to build institutional capacity of the NDA because there is where it all starts. The NDAs, we need to have a very strong NDA that drives the process of implementation, creating MRV systems, really committing the responsible institution into implementation. And of course, the most important thing is finance.
Thank you. I asked for one measure, you see, all of what they don't give me. So you could understand the complexity of the challenge that we have before us. Mr. Manuel, please.
You can hear me, right? Okay. So I think for taking from what Mr. Samunda said, I think it's collaboration. I think we need to prioritize that. We are a plethora of islands or small spaces. I think for me, what we need to now do is come together. Agriculture is something that is important to all of us, maybe at different levels, maybe different commodities, but for sure, I think collaboration is what we need. We need organizations like ICA, CARDI, everybody to kind of come together and let's look at what climate smart agriculture really is for our region along our different landscapes. We know we have the volcanic, we have the coral, we have the river basin countries as well. What does our agricultural future look like? What are those crops that are going to help us make that transition? And I love the fact I'm a marine biologist first. And so bringing in the seascapes and looking at how we work together to ensure that agriculture does not threaten, but agriculture actually helps to enhance our seascapes, our coastal areas. How that in itself helps us deal with flood mitigation, for example. How we plan better overall, using the land, which comes back, and really land use planning so that we don't have those threats that we currently have. So I think for me, I think it's getting all the partners together and let's all find where we play a part and we move forward from there together, working together to ensure that our food security is met, our NDCs are implemented, the action does happen, but that it doesn't happen in silos, that it doesn't happen in certain spaces. And at the end, where we get the successes, that we have a platform by which we can share those with others, so that other people don't have to make the same mistakes or go the long route. Yeah, so for me, it would be collaboration.
Thank you, Mr. Manuel. So in essence, we are not competitors in this thing. We are allies, and we must begin to see ourselves in that manner. Thank you. Mr. Ali?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like having seen a lot of NDCs and the amount of work that has gone into developing those plans, I don't think it's a lack of national planning. I do think, however, that obviously some of what my colleague said is absolutely true. I do think that the sustainable financing is key. You know, I think we have gotten very used to projects and living and dying by projects. I really think that there is an opportunity to really think about the interventions that we are taking, that there is sustainable financing for the long term. Because whenever projects stop, what happens is that there's a restart again in the system. And I think that is part of the challenge we have. So I sometimes people say, well, the issue is not money. There's lots of money, but the reality is the money is not getting through. So with sustainable financing, what I would say, Kurt, is access. Because that's the big challenge here people have been talking about, that, the money is there, but it's access. So the NDCs are there. We have all the plans. I mean, Dominica in particular have a national financing vehicle for how to sort of, help rebuild the country using nature. And we need money for that, right? So I think it's the access to the money, and I think it's long-term sustainable financing. I think everything else, we can probably find a way to build that in country. But that's, I think, one of the challenges.
Thank you. And we have the ministers here. I think the key thing I'm hearing, we really need to begin to look at and assess whether the project approach to development is the most viable approach for us, or should it be coupled, if anything. So, ministers, we're passing on some work to you going forward. Thank you, Mr. Ali. And Calvin, please.
Yeah. Let me just read a statistic. Between 2016 and 2019, approximately $5 billion in bilateral and multilateral sources flowed to assist in the global efforts to combat land degradation. That's between 2016 and 2019. I think that coincides with what my colleague said. The issue is not lack of resources. From our experience, success comes when we all work together. So if we want to be successful in the Caribbean region, we cannot find success in individual efforts. It must come through all of us working together. I'll give you an example. We have a project, 14 Caribbean countries, called Soil Care. And we created it as a bankable project, which answers his question. And we were able to attract 20 million, which then triggered another request from the ministers, and that's why we are partnering with ICA, to do another bankable project, but not for 1, 2, 3, 4 countries, all 14 countries, which will attract $80 million. So I think the model is there. We just have to work together at all levels. I heard working together at the institutional levels. I want to argue that that still doesn't work unless the countries agree to work together.
Thank you. I think within CARICOM, we supposedly have the structural framework for that to happen. So I'm hearing pooling of resources, action, coordination, collaboration. And again, as I say, we have a minister right there to take the message to his caucus colleague ministers. Thank you. So, colleagues, I deliberately didn't speak much because I wanted sufficient time for interaction. I know there are persons in the audience that I could see that I have known for a few years who are in the field, so I expect some healthy discourse with our esteemed panel here. Nikidia, can you assist me with a mic? Yeah, we'll just pass it when you're going to answer, Sean. Yes. The floor is open to the audience. Is there any question? Mr. Maxime, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Kurt. I just want to make some comments quickly before the main question. I'm always intrigued when I hear discussions about agriculture's contribution to NDCs, and I never hear mention about agriculture's connection to the NDAs. I think vaguely mentioned it. But unless you have a relationship with your nationally determined, nationally designated, authority, these are the people who control the purse strings. Because your NDCs, as far as I'm concerned, is your ticket to the GCF.
Yes.
So if you do not have agriculture included in your NDCs, you have just closed off a major pipeline for funding. So that would be the first question would be, what has been your experience in terms of how do you integrate agriculture into not only intended nationally determined contribution, but the actual nationally determined contribution. And as a final plug, I want to say that we have nature-based solutions, locally assembled, locally owned, locally trademarked solutions to climate-smart agriculture, which we have been studiously avoiding. And I'm speaking from a position of a certain amount of familiarity to say that outside of soil care and the Ministry of Agriculture in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, there has been no genuine attempt to take on board a comprehensive climate-smart agriculture that is MRV ready, that is compliance ready, that is trademarked and ready for branding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I just like to ask, the question is, what has been the relationship with the NDA has been like?
Very important question. I could put a little more context.
Yeah.
A lot of the NDAs reside in the Ministry of Environment,
Again,
and well, some of them is sustainable
Well, I mean, I would,
finance. In some countries, it's Ministry of Environment, but not in the Ministry of Agriculture. Essentially, that's the
that's the thing.
central thing. And you have to engage them, as Steve is saying, if you want any meaningful input and representation of the persons with the knowledge in agriculture who reside in the ministry. What has been your experience, if any, in that regard? I'm not allowed to talk on that.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say, Kurt, is that, and I'm going to talk, I mean, I'll speak to the Dominica experience, I mean, some Dominica experience, but also regionally as well. I mean, I would say that the experience has been a very good one, I must say, because I think in the Dominica context, the NDA that's around the Green Climate Fund issue has been, I would say, very, not only vocal, but a strong partner in terms of looking at the integrated coastal zone management, integrated approach to that, agriculture being built into that, fisheries component being built into that. So from my experience, that relationship has been a very good one, and that relationship has led to two positive outcomes, right? Which is a GCF approved or close to be approved integrated coastal zone management project for the country that builds in what we've just said. It has the agriculture piece, it has the fisheries piece, so the connection is right. That link is being made through that. And then obviously through that regional umbrella project around the blue economy, which is going to have an agricultural piece as well. So from my experience, if the relationship with the NDA is key, is important, and I think it has been a good experience. But that's, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could be because of the individual, but clearly that experience has been a good one from my perspective.
Yuan, I'll go to you. I'm not sure if Calvin should answer that question.
Yes. In the case of Suriname, like Mr. Maxime, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Mr. Maxime made a very good point. Maxime, sorry. Made a very good point is that the importance of the NDA and a strong NDA. I don't know what is the case in other Caribbean countries, but the NDA in Suriname, and we have a representative from the Ministry of Environment in the room. So they've just started also with a readiness project with the GCF in building the capacity of the NDA to better function. And the other thing is that by implementing by ministries or other institutions that submit projects, you can also drive the motivation of the NDA, because you have to develop your projects and you have to submit, and you can negotiate to put it in the pipeline, and they are the entity that submits. Like I said in my presentation, is that you need to include the agriculture sector in your in your NDC if you want to access the biggest fund, that's the Green Climate Fund. You don't do it, you don't get it.
Thank you. And just in the interest of constructive dialogue, and I think I'm from the region, I'm a St. Lucian, so I have some that I have some stake in the matter that I could speak to. I think Steve is raising a very important issue that at the country levels require some, how would I put it, greater effort in ensuring that that collaboration exists. We recently concluded the GCF Readiness Project with 9 Caribbean territories. We were aiming to have all the CARICOM countries represented. In some cases, just because the NDA never took the call from the Ministry of Agriculture. And it's there, they decide. And I think if we look at the things within the framework of national development, that ministerial collaboration and coordination should not be an if, it must be a must. And I think that's why Steve raised it. Because of the importance of agriculture, even the whole framework of climate change and the impacts, you see the direct impacts on our farmers. So it's a direct impact on our economies. We must ensure that there is that continuous engagement between the NDAs and the counterparts in the Ministry of Agriculture. So whatever we're doing in terms of contributions in the agriculture sector is adequately reflected. And I think we must, at the level of the country, governments ensure that that takes place. So very important consideration going forward. And of course, if you want to capture the finance, you need to have that kind of coordination. If not, the agriculture sector will continuously be left behind. Minister, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just for the panel. We know that there's a need for synergies across island states. And because we know every economy have a peculiar situation. We also know that there's political will, but we also know that there are limitations when we look at the period of time that governments operate. Westminster system of government, every 5 years there's an election, and so there's a shifting of personalities. The question is, how do you see as various agents here, that synergy living beyond the lifespan of say, an elected government, a 5-year period, for instance? And how do we create that synergies? And how do we get agencies across the region to create those synergies among themselves that will live beyond the lifespan of a political situation?
I'll take the first stab at it. Thank you, Minister, for the question. So I think that's actually the beauty of what was created by the Paris Agreement. We are now making nationally determined contributions. It is every 5 years. In fact, most countries should now be thinking of their 2025 submission and looking at what sectors you want to include, what work, how you want to highlight it, how you want to involve that sector. That's an external, this is now an international obligation as a party to the Paris Agreement that we should, of course, we know within the SIDS context we have a little bit of flexibility, but I think your technicians should be holding us to the 5 years to ensure that it gets put in there, put in on that level, and then we hold to that. We speak to both sides of the aisle as much as possible when you're a technician to ensure that this is national, and national goes beyond the political cycles, or should go beyond the political cycles, and should really be embraced by all the various sectors. So that's one. I think you as a current policymaker need to also push that in cabinet we talk about these kinds of things, that this gets on the agenda and the work that's being done, and to ensure that all the sectors are talking to the NDA, and to ensure that the questions are being asked at that level. On a regional standpoint, I also think us as regional entities and even those who are international also need to put forward, even though they are not necessarily binding, but put forward a plan, a vision for our region in terms of all the different sectors that we're dealing with climate change. Climate change is that one thing that spans all the sectors, much like development. So now we're doing development with climate change in mind, and I think that's something we need to make sure. I know we're focused on NDCs, but I don't want to forget our NAPs, which are our national adaptation plans, and we know as SIDS, mitigation is there, and we're gonna work on that. But we're not going to make the contribution that's going to make the difference, and thus we need to adapt. And we need to have national adaptation plans that look at the long, short, and medium terms. What are the various indicators we want to highlight, and make sure that we are doing our adaptation communications and making sure that we are meeting those, so that we're always talking about this, that this goes beyond a political cycle, because you're always talking about the work that needs to be done, the financing that's needed, and the work that is being done at a local level.
Thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. You want to give us, go ahead. You have a mic.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you for that question. I'll try to put it into perspective. Is how I want to go about it is that, yeah, my colleague here mentioned the plans, the national plans that we have. We have the NDCs, we have the NAP. What we made sure is that we have climate change covered into our national policy. But the issue is, have we ensured that climate change is also integrated into agriculture policy? And that is often not the case. We need to make that translation from national policies, national plans, and integrate that into agriculture policy and plans. In that way, you can drive commitments from the policymakers by also setting up MRV systems that you are committed to engage into this process of building resilience of the climate, of the agriculture sector.
Thank you. Minister, if you'll indulge me, I would like to give a brief response, which would be a little less diplomatic. And I'm calling not on my ICA credentials, I'm calling on my Senosian credentials for that. I think what we have been seeing over the years is that we enter into a phase or stage or whatever you want to call it of hyper-partisanship in politics as we have never seen before, a level of tribalism that is really destructive to our countries. We grew up knowing that political parties would, do the little, what we call in the local parlance, speak on the exchange of words. But they would laugh at the end of, whatever campaign. Right now, we see an open threats and hatred between political parties and members. And I think it impacts the planning, where you are forced to deliver on your promises within a limited time period, which may not be adequate or the best approach for the broader developmental goals of the country. Because some things could be achieved within a 5-year term, some things will never be achieved. But your role within any given term is to lay the groundwork for the further development. But if you really care about something, you know that if you lose the election, the other person is going to destroy it, you try your best to complete, which is not beneficial to the country. And we have to try to move beyond that. We need to have a long-term, as Ms. Emmanuel is saying, long-term developmental plans that would be 10, 20, 15 years, which is based on the interests of the country. So that political and social consciousness, I think we have to start to nurture it, to pull us back from that hyper-partisanship we're saying. I'm from the region, so I know examples. Minister, you're in the middle of what's going on, so you know what I'm talking about. But I think as a broader society, and I think CARICOM has a role in that, how do we go back to deal with things that there are certain developmental priorities that are of importance and value to the nation that we may argue about our differences and approaches to achieving it, but never taking it off the table. And I think that's somewhere we have to go. It's not in the purview of our panelists to do it, but it's a dialogue we need to begin to have at the broader regional level going forward. The floor is still open. I deliberately left a lot of time for interaction. Minister, I don't know if you want to have a follow-up.
I get the point, and I mean, I spoke to a few colleagues of mine from the region, just being here. And so we're also mindful of the political models that we have in the Caribbean. We speak about Singapore, for instance,
Yeah.
but we don't speak about what is it that happened at the grassroots level in Singapore to get to that point.
Exactly.
We speak about how we transform a desert in Dubai into this, but we're not speaking about the government structures that are in place. And we're in a region where everyone who has a smartphone or access to the internet is an expert in something. And you have to satisfy his or her needs. And so the bigger picture for continuity doesn't exist.
Exactly.
And that's the reality of the situation that we're in our region. So sometimes we have to have that conversation where we have to move beyond the party colors and a national dish, a flag, a national song.
Well, the national dish is good, eh?
And it has to be a big approach. I'm happy
agree.
for example, the OECS has a good model,
Yeah.
common currency.
Yeah.
It's relevant. It's pinned against the US dollar. It's tight. And how do we get that into the CARICOM? How do we get away from the small nationalistic agendas into a regional agenda? And so these are the
Yeah.
hard things we have to do as a region.
Exactly.
It's tough. It's not easy, but I think they are living examples in our lives, and that shows that a sort of shifting of that
Exactly.
consciousness can help.
So, colleagues, we have not moved from the topic, you know. If you don't resolve that, then we don't achieve this. Mr. James, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. So I thank the minister for being a little granular in his question, because we have a living example. And that's why I believe a regional approach sometimes is the best approach for a lot of the work that we have to do, particularly in this case in the agriculture sector. So in developing our soil care project, just as it was about to kickstart to be rolled out in the islands, there was a change in government in one of the territories, and the approach was very, I would say, bipolar. On one side, they were going to go forward, but the new entity coming in says, no, we're not going to do it. Now, if we were dealing with a national bilateral project, I think that project would have stopped.
Yeah.
But because it's a regional project, we had some room for negotiation. So what we did is we said, okay, what really is the issue? If we stick with the indicators and the objectives, can we modify the project to suit your policy coming in? And the answer was yes. I think those are so there are two lessons we took out of that. The regional approach puts pressure on colleague countries to continue with the process, and I think we were able to negotiate on good faith because of the level of trust as an agency we built with the ministry that we were dealing with, so that the incoming policymaker did not feel as if it was the other side's project coming in, but it was a project that they can buy into, make some changes, and go forward. I don't think, from all I'm reading and all I'm looking at in terms of geopolitics, we are going to see a shift in the way politics is done. But I think we as development agencies have to work with the parties to show that putting party politics aside, let's look at national development. And we have to learn also to compromise and negotiate, taking into consideration new ideas that may be coming in with a new entity. That's our live experience.
Thank you. So to put it in the balance, we need a regional approach as a mitigative measure. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So I'm not sure if I have a question though, but I'll just speak about implementation because that is, as someone as the focal point for climate change in Dominica, and that has been my headache. After we make all these wonderful NDCs, and we decide we want, but the implementation is the part. And one of the issues, capacity. We definitely lack the capacity to implement. I mean, that is one. And finance is key because if it's cross-sectoral, so you would need different ministries involved, not just environment or agriculture, but finance, and you must have focal points at each level that take that seriously because people have their work already, and when you add implementation to them, you kind of having difficulty. Even in Dominica, trying to work with agriculture in terms of NDCs. It's kind of when you ask people to come to meetings, but they have other things. They have their job description. So maybe we have to review the whole governance in terms of NDC and get everyone involved, and then we need to learn how in terms of attracting the finance. We know about the green climate funds, and we know how difficult it is, to attract funds. Maybe it'll take you about 10 years. I know we just had a hurricane in 2017, Hurricane Maria, and I know World Bank, Green Climate Fund is very difficult. It take you a long time. By that time, you'll get the next hit, and you'll be dealing with different issues. So I don't know what the panel think about this, but I think it's imperative that this is something we need to look at. How do we implement? How do we build capacity to implement? And how do we attract finance? Thank
Yes, I think the panel in their deliberations addressed a lot of it. The issue of collaboration is key. That was mentioned. You mentioned about building capacity, and that's where that kind of collaboration, you have PISLM coming in with the experts, ICA, FAO, private enterprise coming in to support you in help building capacity. I don't know if you want to speak to it or if you all think you'll have adequately handled it. Because I want one more question before I make the final round. You want to say something, Shana?
So
Go ahead.
I would, in terms of being able to implement and of course getting everybody on board, my recommendation would be the establishment of a joint jointly led between the NDA and environment, a national climate change committee. I don't know if Dominica has one, but you look at all your sectors, you get that focal point from each sector, and you meet, whether it's once a year, twice a year. You meet with the focus of what are you doing? So you bring everybody together, you hear, because everybody may be working, it's true, in their silos on their project, but you bring health and you bring agriculture and you put a fisheries person and you have maybe even a forestry person. So there might be multiple focal points within one ministry, but you want to bring everybody together and you want the finance people in the room as well to tell you what they're hearing. And having that on a consistent basis, and this is outside of a project, so this should be something that's sustained by the ministry that's leading in climate change, and you build those relationships in order to hopefully be able to then call on somebody when you really need the implementation to happen. It takes a long time, and it takes personalities working together. I'm not going to deny that, but it's a try, and I think it's a sustainable thing that can be done and can be supported within any country. Yeah.
Wonderful advice. Final question from the audience, and then I will give the panel 1 minute just to give the final thoughts.
So I'm particularly lucky in that I'm in a position to talk about writing a readiness grant and writing a NAP. Kurt will know that I've written 2 readiness grants. So I've seen the difficulties involved in trying to write a project that sounds like agriculture, but really involves health, environment. I would openly challenge anybody here to tell me which ministry, which agriculture ministry in the region has linked their NDCs to the contributions coming out of the health sector. I can ask that because I've looked,
Yeah.
and apart from the minister that I advise, I can't think of any other ministry that has really made that link. And my question to the panel is, how often have you truly integrated all the aspects of agriculture into your NDC contribution?
Thank you. Zamunda, I don't know. Who wants to take a stab at it? Shana?
I I will defend I will defend the countries this way. When we first did NDCs, I think everybody didn't know what we really didn't know what we were doing. I think our updated. Some people had second, some people had updated. I think we're getting better at it, and I think in 2 years when you see those new, improved, updated NDCs, or third in some cases, or second, they will look different. I think we've been through a lot. I think COVID taught us a lot about the need to integrate all of it and really integrate it into our climate plan. So, as somebody who once sat in the ministry having to write an NDC, well, an updated NDC at least, and going through that process, we were still trying to figure out what you put in there and what you leave for a nap and what you leave for the next thing and what you put in even a long-term low-emission development strategy, which is a whole new thing that we're now talking about. So I think it's a good challenge. I think we should challenge our countries to do that in their next NDC, to look more at a more integrated approach. But I do know that many of us, when we were doing it, we were kind of going in blind. There wasn't even a way to write an NDC. If you look at them, if you look at those first ones, everybody wrote it different. And as we got to the second one, we started kind of getting the picture, and I think by the next one we're gonna get it, and hopefully we get it integrated.
Yeah, and what she's saying is validated under the GCF already. They did do a scoping study, which already showed that, in the beginning you had almost no one, and gradually they began incorporating. So I suspect the knowledge of what exactly is required was what was lacking at the launch. So we're hoping in the future that everyone in agriculture will be fully represented, but the learning curve has been steep, and I think that is the challenge there. So we are running out of time. I'll give 1 minute to each panelist for closing remarks. Mr. Samunda.
That's a big challenge. Yeah, I'd say, like I said in my introduction, and after that, it's time that we really start acting. We work for the farmers on the ground. We need actions on the ground. We don't need any more paperwork, workshops. Capacity building is great, but what we actually need now is action on the ground, so that the people who need it and don't speak these complicated languages that we use here and don't understand, we need to help them. We need to give them the support that we learn, that we get here, and translate that into action in the ground so that they really benefit from it and make the agriculture sector resilient.
Thank you, Mr. Samunda. Mr. Manuel.
I think for me, I think what we really need is coordination, to capture those stories that are happening. I know there is work happening. So to capture those successes, absolutely. I also think it's important that we continue to work together, continue to support each other. I think the ministries of climate, those that deal with climate change, environment, wherever it falls, they need that support from regional entities and international entities like us. So we also need to make ourselves available and ensure that they know who to call when they need the help. And finally, I think we also need to, as a region, recognize our vulnerability and where we can help each other, help each other. So your technicians across the region should know each other well enough to be able to call upon each other. Hey, I have this issue. What did you guys do when it came up? We need to make sure that those networks are built and we have those kinds of networks that can continue to support all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Mr. Ali?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think from a regional perspective, I think we need to be more aggressive from where I sit, and we need more ambition. Because and part of it also includes the speed and the scale. I mean, a lot of the conversations that's going on, as you can see here. I mean, one of the things that's interesting for me sitting where I sit in an international space is how our islands get picked off one by one on a number of issues. And I think that, and I see in different parts of the world, the unification that's happening, whether it's around aligning capacities, aligning the NDCs, really unifying to go big or go home. And it's really important because this morning I was at a session where the predictions doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. And the conversations that's coming out of here, people are still spending a lot of time on mitigation. Yes, we got the loss and damage funding, and I know that the big aspect is going to be how we action this. But I do feel sometimes there is a need for more ambition coming out of the region. I think we see Mia Motley starting to do some of that for Barbados, but I think we need a regional kind of ambition and speed and scale. And I know that has implications for each of our island states, but I think we need to team up. We need to team up better. We need to recognize that we have regional institutions like the OECS and CARICOM. We need to find a way to empower those institutions to speak up, but I think we need more of that. So I would say for me, for the panel, I know that I came in to talk about the seascapes, and I think it's a natural link as we update our NDCs and we look more to link the marine and the terrestrial. But I think we need to up our ambition. Right now it's about speed and scale, and it's about really thinking big, and I think we need to really think about how we achieve that.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Mr. James, closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. I want to endorse what my colleague from both the OECS and CI said. I think it's important, scale, collaboration at all levels. I also want to end by saying that from where I sit, I note that agriculture is cross-cutting across the conventions. And with the limited resources we have, I think it's important, the advice given to Dominica, for example, that not only the climate change people sit on that committee, but you have the biodiversity and you have the land people sitting on that committee, because you'll be surprised, and I've encountered it, where all three of us end up competing for the same resources when we should be collaborating and building scale. So I just want to end with that.
Thank you very much. So colleagues, all good things must come to an end. For a wonderful and healthy discourse, a round of applause for our panelists. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming and ensuring that we had a very robust and healthy discussion. Thank you very much.